So, U.S. wine consumption recently hit a 60-year low.
Yeah, which is a wild metric to actually see on paper.
Right. I mean, overall alcohol volume is measurably dropping across the board.
Yeah.
But here is the paradox. The total monetary value of the alcohol market hasn't flinched at all.
Not even a little bit.
The industry is basically making the exact same amount of money, if not more, honestly, on significantly less liquid. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at the invisible forces that are completely rewiring how the world drinks.
And it is a massive rewiring.
Exactly. For you listening, our mission today is to examine the specific behavioral shifts driving the modern beverage aisle. And we're using the Theory House 6 and 26 Beverage Trends Report as our foundational source for this.
Wow.
And what really emerges from this data is a picture of an industry that is moving out of this phase of reactive experimentation and moving into an era of highly intentional progress.
Yeah, intentional progress is really the right lens for this whole discussion. Because for a long time, the beverage landscape was just built on legacy habits, you know?
Right. And sheer volume.
Exactly. Sheer volume. You just adapted to whatever was on the shelf at the grocery store.
Yeah.
But what the Theory House report outlines is this really fascinating convergence of three distinct consumer demands. So we have function, mindfulness, and sustainability.
Which changes the power dynamic.
Completely. The brands are no longer dictating the terms. Consumers are demanding that their beverages perform very specific tasks.
Whether that's physical, mental, or environmental.
Right. And they're more than willing to pay a premium for that specific performance.
So to really understand the mechanics of this shift, I think we should start by looking at the most entrenched category we have, which is alcohol.
Makes sense.
Because that decline in wine consumption that I mentioned, it isn't just a blip in the data. It represents a fundamental rewiring of a century-old social habit.
Yeah, 20% drop from its peak in 2021 is, that's a structural shift.
It is, but like we said, the revenue isn't disappearing. Consumers are just adopting this drink less but better philosophy.
Yeah, we are seeing the $30 bottle become the new baseline for a typical purchase, which is a huge jump.
So people are basically bypassing those mass-produced, lower-tier table wines.
Exactly. The ones they might have previously bought for, say, a casual Tuesday night. They're consolidating their purchases now. When they do actually buy, the expectation is a significantly higher quality yield.
Which changes the occasion entirely. The Tuesday night casual drink is either being upgraded or it's being replaced by much lighter options.
Yeah.
Like the report highlights brands like Box Breeze, right? Which sit in the 7% to 10% ABV or alcohol by volume range.
Right. And for context, a standard Cabernet Sauvignon often sits around, 14% ABV?
Yeah, usually around 14. So cutting that number in half allows a consumer to maintain the ritual of having a glass of wine with dinner, but without the physiological commitment or that sluggish morning that follows.
And that desire right there to preserve the ritual while modifying the physiological impact, that is the direct catalyst for the explosive growth in the no and low alcohol category, or no low.
The numbers on that are staggering.
Oh, they're huge. Between 2022-2024, across the world's top 10 beverage markets, 61 million new consumers entered the no-alcohol space.
Wow. 61 million.
Yeah, and that influx is driving a growth rate 7 times higher than traditional alcohol, which is, like we said, currently sitting flat. Drinking is basically becoming an exercise in curation rather than just a pursuit of intoxication.
It makes me think of an analogy. It's regarding hardware and software.
Okay, also.
It's like consumers are consciously decoupling the two. So the hardware is the ritual, right? It's the weight of a nice crystal glass, the complex botanical aroma, the sound of ice clinking, the social act of cheersing.
Right, the tactile experience.
Exactly. We still require that hardware because we are social creatures.
Yeah.
But the ethanol, the alcohol itself, is the software. And a rapidly growing demographic is actively choosing to either uninstall that software completely or, upgrade to a lower impact version.
I like that. The hardware-software distinction highlights the production challenge perfectly, actually.
Right.
Because for decades, non-alcoholic wine or beer was essentially just glorified grape juice or, malt soda.
Right. It was terribly sweet, usually.
Yeah, it lacked the bite, the viscosity, and that really complex mouthfeel that ethanol naturally provides. But to capture those 61 million new consumers, producers have had to completely re-engineer their methods.
Because to keep the hardware experience premium, you have to actually mimic the mechanics of alcohol.
Precisely.
So how exactly are they achieving that chemically? Because replicating the burn of alcohol without the actual ethanol seems like a massive hurdle.
It is, and it requires some very sophisticated intervention. Some brands are utilizing vacuum distillation. So in traditional distillation, you heat the liquid up to boil off the alcohol. But that high heat destroys the delicate, volatile, aromatic compounds that give wine or spirits their actual flavor.
Basically cooks it.
Right. But by placing the liquid in a vacuum, the boiling point of alcohol drops significantly. So you can remove the ethanol at room temperature, which completely preserves the complex flavor profile.
That's incredibly clever.
It is. And other brands are building alternatives completely from scratch. They use ingredients like capsaicin from chili peppers to replicate the physical warmth or that bite of liquor, and natural glycerin to mimic the heavy, sort of coating mouthfeel of a spirit.
So that level of engineering really explains the massive influx of capital and, frankly, the cultural cachet we are seeing.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, we have Tom Holland launching Barrow, a non-alcoholic beer, Lewis Hamilton backing Almave, which is an agave-based non-alcoholic spirit, Katy Perry with Desoy offering these sparkling non-alcoholic aperitifs.
The celebrity investment alone tells you it's a structural shift.
And it moves straight into high-end dining, too. The report points to Naughty, which is an organic, non-alcoholic wine that is actively securing placement on Michelin-starred tasting menus.
Which is the ultimate validation.
Truly. A Michelin-starred restaurant will not serve a product if it feels like a penalty for the designated driver, you know? It has to stand on its own culinary merit.
Yeah, if a product can survive the scrutiny of a Michelin tasting menu without alcohol, it proves that moderation is just, it's no longer viewed as a compromise.
Exactly.
And this concept of earning the occasion becomes even more critical when we analyze what consumers choose when they do opt for traditional alcohol.
All right, let's look at that. Because the total U.S. alcohol volume declined roughly 3% in 2024, but the overall monetary value held firm. That money is migrating somewhere. And according to the Theory House data, that value is being supported almost entirely by tequila, mezcal, and ready-to-drink cocktails. Vodka has actually been completely overtaken by agave spirits as the engine of high-value growth.
Yeah, and the data reflects a really distinct generational pivot there. Millennials and Gen Z are demonstrating a clear preference for provenance.
Okay, explain that.
Well, they want to know the exact origin of the agricultural product in their glass. They care about the farming.
I have to pause on that, though. Because tequila's historical reputation in Western culture has been almost entirely associated with high-volume party consumption.
Yeah, spring break.
Exactly. It was the shot taken at midnight with salt and a lime, not a beverage scrutinized for its agricultural provenance. So how does a legacy category with that specific kind of rowdy reputation completely rebrand itself into a premium signal of authenticity?
It's a great question. And it really comes down to transparency and the rejection of industrial shortcuts. To understand the rebrand, you kind of have to understand how mass market tequila is typically made.
Okay.
So in Mexico, regulations legally allow up to 1% of a tequila's volume to consist of additives without requiring any disclosure on the label.
Well, 1% doesn't sound like much on paper.
I know, but in terms of flavor chemistry, 1% is actually massive.
Really?
Oh yeah. Industrial producers often use these things called diffusers, which act like giant microwaves, essentially, to rapidly extract starches from young, underripe agave.
That doesn't sound very premium.
It's not. It completely strips the plant of its natural flavor. So to fix it, they add glycerin for a smoother mouthfeel, oak extract to fake the flavor of barrel aging, caramel coloring to make it look older, and agave syrup or jarabe to mask the harshness.
Wow.
And the modern consumer is highly educated now, so they are increasingly rejecting that industrial process.
So the premium growth is coming from brands that actively market what they are not doing.
Precisely. The growth is all in additive-free tequila, the consumers demanding traditional brick oven roasting, slower fermentation, and zero artificial manipulation.
That makes sense. The report highlights Tequila Ocho as a primary example of this.
Yes.
They operate on this single estate, vintage-focused model. So every bottle actually reflects the specific plot of land, the terroir, where the agave was grown in a specific year.
They're treating agave exactly the same way the French treat wine grapes.
Exactly. And when you buy a bottle of Tequila Ocho, you are purchasing a narrative of sustainable agriculture. If you are only going to have one drink on a Friday night instead of 3 or 4, that single drink needs to carry a backstory that justifies the indulgence.
It's a sustainability and authenticity premium.
Right. Now, this demand for profound intentionality and specific outcomes, it isn't just confined to our evening routines. This exact behavioral shift is currently dismantling the traditional morning beverage market, too.
Yeah, the evolution of the coffee and tea categories is essentially a mirror image of the alcohol shift, just focused on a totally different physiological target.
Okay, break that down.
Well, historically, coffee was viewed as a pretty basic blunt force stimulation tool, a simple caffeine delivery system.
That will wake me up.
Exactly. But today, it is being evaluated as an engineered performance asset.
It's like the old model of caffeine consumption felt like using a sledgehammer, you know. You consumed highly roasted, highly acidic coffee or these really intense artificial energy drinks to forcibly break through fatigue.
And the biological cost was high.
Right. Severe jitters, gastrointestinal distress, and an inevitable crash when the caffeine wore off. But the new formulations outlined in the 2026 report, they operate much more like a scalpel.
That transition from a sledgehammer to a scalpel is fundamentally a shift from amplification to optimization. Because we know how caffeine works biologically. It blocks adenosine, which is the neurotransmitter that makes you feel tired.
Okay.
But when you just dump massive amounts of pure caffeine into the system, the brain eventually overcompensates, leading to that really sharp crash. So brands are now formulating products that actually manage that curve.
And the report specifically details how this optimization is achieved biochemically. It's not just about the coffee bean anymore. Brands are integrating functional mushrooms like lion's mane or chaga, and crucially, pairing caffeine with amino acids like L-theanine.
L-theanine is the real key mechanism there. It is an amino acid naturally found in green tea leaves.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and when it crosses the blood-brain barrier, it promotes the generation of alpha brainwaves, which are associated with a state of relaxed alertness.
Relaxed alertness, that's exactly what people want.
Right. So when you bond L-theanine with caffeine, it counteracts the vasoconstriction and the central nervous system spikes that cause the jitters. You get the cognitive focus of the caffeine, but the L-theanine entirely smooths out the uptake and the descent.
So it provides a steady, predictable plateau of energy rather than a jagged spike.
Exactly. The outcome is the hero now, not the ingredient.
Which is why brands like Life Boost Coffee are targeting the physical side effects by focusing on low-acid, single-origin beans to actively protect the gut microbiome. Meanwhile, brands like Everyday Dose are leaning into the adaptogen blends to offer that sustained mental clarity. They're selling an optimized physiological state, not just a hot beverage.
And that same demand for precision and clean ingredients is also exactly what is driving the ready-to-drink, or RTD, cocktail market. The data projects this specific category to grow over 400% in North America by 2029.
400% is huge. But wait, if consumers are seeking profound intention and craft, why are they turning to canned cocktails?
Well, it's the intersection of convenience, economic reality, and what the report calls permission.
Permission.
Yeah. Look at it this way. In an inflationary environment, paying $20 for a cocktail at a bar creates friction. A well-crafted canned cocktail offers a reliable, cheaper alternative. However, the modern consumer will not grant a brand permission to enter their routine if the can is just filled with malt liquor and artificial flavoring.
Oh, I see. So the ingredients have to justify the convenience.
Exactly. Real juices, actual distilled spirits, and a total absence of artificial dyes.
And the report mentions nostalgia-driven innovation as a key driver here, too. For instance, elevated Shirley Temples made with real vodka. It taps into the psychological desire for a little treat.
Yeah, the brand Sun Cruiser is noted as a breakout in this space. They produce a vodka-based iced tea that relies on simple, recognizable flavor cues and real spirits credibility.
So it avoids the trap of feeling artificially synthesized.
Right. The RTD brands that capture that 400% growth will be the ones that absolutely refuse to compromise on ingredient integrity, allowing the consumer to feel smart about their convenience choice.
That makes total sense. So we've looked at how the demand for mindfulness and precise function is altering everything from a Friday night tequila to a Tuesday morning coffee.
Yeah.
But we have to address what the Theory House report identifies as the single most disruptive force approaching the 2026 beverage aisle. Because it isn't a packaging innovation or a new botanical flavor profile, it is a widespread medical and physiological shift.
This is the most fascinating part of the report. They are highlighting the GLP-1 effect.
The weight management medication.
Exactly. As GLP-1 medications transition from a niche medical intervention to a truly mainstream lifestyle factor, they are acting as a massive behavioral catalyst.
Because they change how you eat.
They do, but they aren't merely altering how people eat. They are fundamentally redefining the parameters of how, when, and why people consume liquids.
So to understand the disruption, we really need to look at the biological mechanism of these drugs. GLP-1 stands for glucagon-like peptide 1.
Right.
It's a hormone that naturally occurs in the body, and these medications mimic it. They do two primary things. They signal the appetite center in the brain that you are full, and they significantly delay gastric emptying.
Which means food physically stays in the stomach longer.
Exactly.
And because of that delayed gastric emptying, consumers on GLP-1s are dealing with a heavily restricted intake volume. They physically cannot consume the same amount of food or liquid.
Right, there just isn't room.
Exactly. Consequently, they are expecting vastly more utility from every single sip they do take. Simple hydration is no longer adequate.
The defining metric for a successful beverage in this new paradigm is satiety. But the report notes that winning beverages must help consumers feel steady and in control.
Yep.
I want to dig into that specific phrasing. If a medication is already making you feel full, how does a beverage brand manufacture the psychological feeling of being in control?
Well, it addresses the underlying anxiety of a shifting metabolism.
Okay.
A consumer on these medications might experience the thought, I am eating drastically less, but I don't want to feel deprived, and I really don't want my blood sugar to crash.
That makes sense.
So brands manufacture that feeling of control by engineering beverages that provide dense nutritional signaling without unnecessary, uncomfortable bulk.
So they are actively managing blood sugar stability to prevent that kind of panic response of sudden hunger.
Exactly.
And they are achieving this through highly specific formulations. Protein-forward profiles, added soluble fiber, and low-sugar blends.
The report highlights products like Bloom and Oikos Fusion. Like an Oikos Fusion drink isn't positioned as a simple flavored water. It's a highly efficient vehicle for protein.
Right.
It physically occupies space in the stomach, stabilizing the glycemic response, which in turn delivers actual emotional reassurance.
It reassures the consumer that they have adequately nourished themselves.
Right, making the limited calories they can actually consume feel worth it.
So GLP-1 isn't shrinking the beverage category. It is demanding a level of utility that simply wasn't required when consumers drank for mindless refreshment. Brands that can credibly solve the tension between restricted volume and the need for emotional and physical satiety are the ones capturing strong repeat purchases.
It creates a landscape where functionality is just the absolute baseline for entry.
Which brings us to the core takeaway for you, the listener. The next time you walk down a grocery aisle, recognize that you are witnessing the end of the passive beverage.
It really is the end of an era.
It is. The choices you make, whether it's selecting a vacuum-distilled no-low aperitif, verifying the additive-free status of a single estate tequila, optimizing your morning with L-theanine-infused coffee, or utilizing a protein-heavy functional drink to manage your blood sugar, are actively forcing an entire industry to evolve. The era of empty choices is being replaced by an era of highly engineered, intentional progress.
And as we observe this progression toward hyper-engineered, outcome-specific beverages, it prompts a pretty critical observation about our own neurochemistry.
Oh.
Yeah. If our everyday drinks are becoming so precisely calibrated to optimize our focus, perfectly manage our satiety, and entirely smooth out our energy curves, what happens to our baseline?
We are essentially removing the friction.
Exactly. We're engineering away the spikes and the crashes.
Yeah.
But our brain's dopamine reward systems evolved to navigate natural fluctuations, to respond to hunger, fatigue, and the subsequent relief of those states.
That's a really good point.
So the provocative question we must consider moving forward is this. If we spend our days consuming liquids mathematically designed to keep us perfectly leveled out, how does a lifetime of engineered biological steadiness alter our natural chemical resilience?
Wow.
So when you reach for a highly optimized drink tomorrow, ask yourself, are you just quenching a thirst, or are you outsourcing your internal regulation to a can?